This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with artist William Monk about his artistic journey and his latest work. The conversation touches on the significance of scale, his use of repetition, how one defines a landscape, and his most recent exhibition, West of Nowhere, which just wrapped at Pace Gallery in Los Angeles. And now, a conversation about nothing and nowhere with artist William Monk. William Monk, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. William, you have a show coming up in LA with Pace Gallery, an exhibit titled West of Nowhere, now through October 21st at the 1201 South La Brea Avenue location there in LA. Will, I usually like to start conversations with artists with a hypothetical, which is, let's say you're at a dinner party, seated next to someone who has no idea who you are or what your work looks like. Where do you start to describe that to them?
Yeah, no, I knew this question was coming, so I've done my research. That is the. I hate that question. I mean, I'm happy for you to say it, but in the context of the dinner you described, I avoid it like the plague. I suppose the easiest answer I'd give is I would just say I make. I'd say landscape paintings, but I don't consider myself a landscape painter. But it seems to be the easiest get out of jail quick card, and then hopefully the conversation moves on somewhere else pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, I guess that is probably as good a place to start as any, which is they're landscapes, but they're not. Explain that, because I mean, when I look at your work, I think I know what you mean. I guess it goes back to the history of where your practice started.
Yes,
and it's kind of evolved, and over time, maybe the fact that there's a horizon continues to exist, but maybe what we think of traditionally as landscapes kind of been deconstructed.
I think when you're younger at art school, you're dealing with sort of subject. It can be confusing between the subject and the model, and the reason why I have a difficulty sort of answering the question, what do I do? Is because I feel like the whatever it is, it moves further away from the model, but the model sort of stays is the easiest sort of flag in the ground to see. So I mean, you know, if Monet, for example, was at the dinner party and someone asked him what he did, well, what's he going to say? He paints haystacks at different times of the day. That's going to kill the mood in the party pretty quickly, isn't it? It's not that interesting, but it's not really what he does.
That's the vehicle.
Yeah, it's the vehicle. Yeah, or it's the Hitchcock MacGuffin, if you know what I mean by that. It's the microfilm. It's not the thing that you and I are interested in. It's the so yeah, no. But at school, the model, I think, gets confused, or at least it did with me, and I'm sure with a lot of students, with the thing, whatever the thing is. So it takes time to sort of clear the desk, but the model still remains. I mean, there's still landscapes in that sense. They still have a horizon line, like you say.
Early on, your work seemed to have clear reference. You know, I talked to a lot of artists that talk about place and specific place being very important to their work. And I feel like early on in your career, your reference to place was very specific. And now in this latest body of work, we've kind of gotten to a point where your work is kind of the antithesis of that.
Yes, I think there was the extreme example of that. I mean, the work is not local in that sense. And sort of extreme example of that would be years ago, I did a painting of the cockpit of the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And that's a completely loaded topic. So that's not really mine. And so I just started to strip everything away down to the bare bones. And I mean, even when I make a painting that's got a road in it, that's kind of slightly bothersome to me because a road is still of a location, of a time and a place. It's not I quite like the paintings when they when it's not only the scale is ambiguous, but the location and the time is it's all ambiguous. It could be at any scale, it could be at any place, it could be at any time zone. But those I prefer working in that direction.
Reminds me of a conversation I had with photographer Mona Kuhn. She strictly photographs nude figures. And she was saying that the appeal of photographing nudes to her was that it does become timeless. The nude exists in a world outside of fad and fashion. And when you put them in these innocuous landscapes, it winds up having a certain timelessness to it.
No, absolutely. That's what I would like in my work. So to feel like it was existing outside of that kind of constraint.
Tell me about your experience in school. Tell me about D'Atelier.
Well, I was where was I? I was living in Paris and was going to apply to the art schools in London because I'm English, and that was probably the scope of my imagination back then. Although I was living in Paris, but the application process was going to be 6 months away or something like that, and then I just discovered, I have no idea how I found it, but I found this Tilliers, which I later discovered was a legendary, famous art school, but I had here at the time. I just noticed that the application was all year round, so I thought, well, I'll try that first. Thing is, I don't have to wait, and I got an interview, and I got in. Subsequently, I sort of accidentally backed into one of the best art schools dare I say it, the world. I just had no idea at the time. I'd also never been to Amsterdam before. When I had my interview, the hotel was happened to be in the red light district, and so I was like, "Holy shit! What is this going to be? 2 years?" Of course, that's a very isolated area in Amsterdam. It's not all like that. It's actually Amsterdam is a gorgeous town. But 2 years there, and the school had the reputation of the school is that it's kind of monastic. The other school that's in Amsterdam is the Rijksacademy, and obviously because I'm an ex-student of D'Ateliers, I have a very one-sided view of the relationship between the two schools. It's almost like two competing football teams. So, but from my lopsided viewpoint, the Rijksacademy was a finishing school, and Tilliers was an unfinishing school. It was just a place where you had 2 years to produce crap, and that's what I did. Not everyone did that, by the way. Some of the students there I thought were maybe better served at the Rijksacademy. They went in, they knew what they were about, and they just kept doing that. And it was like that they didn't sort of take the opportunity that was given to them, which is a good opportunity to safe space to produce crap where there's no expectations of anything. Now, what happened to me was a little bit slightly sideways in that they asked everyone to apply for a prize, the Queen's Prize or the Royal Award for Painting. This translation from Dutch. And we all applied. Anyway, I won the prize in the first year, and again, I was very surprised by that, as was everyone in the school, and it kind of went against the attitude of the monastic attitude of you're not here to sort of project yourself out into the outside. Though they had asked us all to apply, so I was only doing what I was told. It kind of a little bit challenging for a while at the school because of the things I had been produced quite varied, and most of it wasn't very good because I was just trying things. And then you have like sort of the outside world wanting to see what you're doing because of you've won this prize, and they kind of want to see, half a dozen things that look like the things that won the prize. And of course, that was never going to be the case because of I was trying different things, but I got through it all, and I think what's good actually is that coming from England, when I was doing my degree in England before, this was at the late 90s, where painting was basically described as dead, and you were an anachronism, and pretty much everyone in the painting department wasn't painting by the end of the 3 years. I was still painting, but then moving to Paris and then Amsterdam, being able to shed that sort of depressing weight, and they don't have that sort of apologetic hang up about painting. They're really into their painting. But I mean, I was able to loosen up a bit. That would have been more challenging in London at that time. So it was a good experience ultimately, and good for me.
The dichotomy, it sounds like, is that they wanted to spend 2 years tearing you down, and after the first year, someone gave you a prize and told you that you were doing stellar work. That becomes a difficult conversation when folks are still trying to get you to challenge yourself.
Yeah, I don't know. They were doing stellar work, but the two paintings that won the prize were, it was the last painting I made before I arrived at the school, and the first painting I made when I got there in like the first couple of weeks. So neither painting had been subjected to the boot camp mentality that you rightly describe. But at no point, at no point did I think that I had to then suddenly make paintings like that just because of those paintings got some attention. Say you're talking to someone who walked into a world famous art school without realizing it. So I'm fortunately spend most of my time ignorant and very slow to catch on to things. So I still spent the 2 years, taking on the attitude of the school. The problem wasn't really that what I was doing was not working with the school. I was totally sort of doing the boot campness of it. The problem was that all these commercial interests, all these sort of gallerists that were suddenly sort of sniffing around my door because I'd won this prize, it was the worst time to be opening the door to them because there's nothing but crap in my studio. So it was kind of a good moment, but perhaps too soon. But it is what it is. I'm here talking to you now, so it's all worked out.
When we look at your body of work, I think it's obvious that we see certain images that you will gravitate towards for doing a series. We can call it repetitions or variations. Is that something that started all the way back there?
Yes, I think so. Although I'd always thought that it wasn't a natural thought. It was one that talking to a teacher, they'd sort of made some suggestions and actually introduced me to Jasper Johns, and brought a book around. We went into the library, grabbed a book, and left it with me. Obviously, I'd heard of Jasper Johns before. I mean, who hasn't? But I hadn't really. Sometimes when artists are so big, you kind of just they become kind of wallpaper. You just kind of forget about them. But no, I had the book, and I was looking at it, and I started to see that what I thought previously as maybe as a negative thing was actually a good thing. And I started to sort of piece together my own interests in that as well. I mean, I don't think that repetition is at all about repetition. I think it's about the exact opposite. When you ask your opening question to the artists, what do they answer when someone asks, what do they do?
Right.
You're repeating the same question, but you're not doing it because you want to get the same answer. You're doing it for the exact opposite reasons, because it will highlight the differences. And if you ask different opening question every time, obviously you'll get a different answer, but that different answer could also be down to, you kind of insert yourself into it. But by asking the same question, you remove yourself from it, and it just becomes purely down to the subject. And so repetition has got nothing to do with repetition at all. It's all about the differences.
You'll settle on an image. I assume there's a certain amount of experimentation in your practice, but at some point you gravitate toward a particular image, and that winds up being the genesis for this repetition. I mean, is this stuff that you work out in your sketchbook, or is this stuff that your finished works are usually 6-7 foot square? Do you play on the surface, or do you have ideas that are more granular that you then figure out this is how I want to apply it to the large surface? What does that part of your process look like?
Well, it depends on the paintings. There isn't really a one size fits all approach. There will be ideas that, a lot of the time the idea is quite sort of vivid in my mind, and so I can get to the composition. Once I start painting, I can get to it quite quickly, and also because I'm working on essentially raw canvas, although it is primed with rabbit skin glue, it's not a white ground that scrape back down and start again. So every mark I make is there, good or bad. I have to live with it. The road does meander, but it's all there in the painting. There'll be some paintings where I'll have what I sort of call them, like I say, a maquette. So it'll be some sort of digital collage, and more often than not, it's actually my own paintings. So the paintings in the LA show are the paintings that are related to these paintings that were shown in New York last year. I made a model for that show, the New York show, on the computer, and when I put the JPEG of the photograph of those landscapes in the virtual space, I screwed up a bit, and instead of sort of copying and pasting them onto the virtual wall, I think I must have hit the wallpaper button or something like that, and it wallpapered it, which meant that and by chance, what would have been on the left side of the painting was thrown into the middle, and what was on the right was thrown back out on the other side. So those landscapes from the New York show, there's this sort of landscape, and it's sort of framed by these columns either side, and then a platform underneath, which kind of horseshoes the landscape. But when I'd sort of goofed and put them incorrectly into the virtual space, it put the columns in the center of the virtual space, and a new composition presented itself to me. And so then it was just and then I just sort of pulled and stretched it around a bit, and gave myself a roadmap of a new composition. So that's how those ones were done. Ones I'm working on at the moment have absolutely nothing apart from the silhouette of a horizon, which is only taking up the lower quarter of the canvas, mm-hmm. And it's just a meandering horizon line. There's nothing, and then there's and then there's some more involved things, like I made some tree paintings where mm-hmm. It'll be a photograph of found a very banal photograph of a forest, zoomed into one section, became very sort of pixelated, and not much sort of illustrative, figurative information, but information nonetheless. And then the white inverted silhouette white trees in front, that was just done by just taking a mouse on the computer. I just put the photograph on Photoshop, mm-hmm. Scaled it to the shape I wanted it, and then with a white paint bucket and a mouse, just drew some lines in front of it, and did that a few times until I felt like I'd got what I wanted, and then that gives me the information I need to start painting. But these all follow the idea that is already quite sort of clear in my mind. I don't a lot of painters will sort of work from a blank canvas, both literally and artistically. They don't know they have no idea what it's going to look like, but they'll arrive at something. Some magic happens. I'm painting in my mind before I get to pick up my brushes, so I'm already daydreaming paintings, all the time.
In some of your work, I think of work that you've done that kind of utilizes some satellite imagery of parcels of land, or this blue one that you call Superman, or the trees you were speaking of. It's like the larger form
that we see from across the room is just kind of a framework for all of this amazing doodling with variety of strokes and colors on the granular level. Can you kind of talk about working within a framework while still allowing that freedom in variety and color and stroke at the granular level?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the power of the horizon line, and you don't need anything but a horizontal line to make people think that it's a landscape. And that's why I kind of don't think of myself as a landscape painter, and I kind of sort of refute it a little bit because of there isn't actually, when you really think about it, there's nothing in my painting even the most sort of quote unquote landscapey paintings. The only thing that makes you think is a landscape is a horizontal line positioned somewhere on the canvas. You know, if it wasn't for that, you're not looking at anything but doodling and paint. And the same with scale as well. Well, we people say I make paintings of volcanoes. I've never painted I've painted one volcano in my entire life, and it was a small painting, probably the size of A4 paper, or was it US legal letter paper? Right. You know, everything else is all made up, and it's only because of that I had one painting or few paintings that had the word Pompeii in it, or a show called Pompeii. But people think, I mean, I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I'm just saying it's all in the mind. You know, I'm not. I'm suggesting things, but I'm not illustrating anything. There's nothing specific about. And the same with scale as well. I mean, the paintings. One would sort of assume a proportionate scale to them, but there's also no specific scale. I mean, you know, those Mount Atom paintings. They could be a mountain, or they could be a molehill, or they could also be the end of a cigarette burning off. You know, I did start those paintings when I was quitting smoking, so I was possibly thinking, subconsciously or not, about smoking all the time.
It is sort of left up to us, the viewer, to figure out scale. Like you said, it could be just us microscopically zooming in on a particular object, but our minds try to. I mean, it's just like when we look at clouds in the sky. You know, we're searching for meaning. We're searching for some sort of box to put the information in, and for some people that's one thing, and for others it's another.
Yeah, I think the scale of the paintings is a human scale, a one-to-one scale with the person in front of the painting. I think when you're looking at when you're getting lost in the details and the doodling, as I do when I'm painting it, you're having your own experience, which is a human experience. So the scale of the paintings is one-to-one. You know, there isn't anything outside of yourself within the paintings. It's all it requires the finishing of the work requires the looking at them.
These paintings that are up at Pace now, you know, you have two different types in there, and the ones are the larger scale ones that you've already described. I appreciate you explaining how you came to that place, but they're really interesting because these colored columns are kind of bifurcating what we interpret as a landscape. It's unusual because it's almost like they're in the foreground. I mean, they go all the way down to the bottom of the painting. So it's like, in terms of space, it's as if these columns are obstructing our view of what we would interpret as the landscape. When you finish a work like that, you know, do you ever think about what subconsciously attracted you to that particular design, that particular composition?
I think with those paintings, it is a little bit more knowable because I had this show in LA is related to the show last year in New York. So the show in New York last year, The Ferryman, was shown at the big gallery in 510 under the High Line, and we divided space into three, and I showed three bodies of work in each room, and the side room where we had the landscapes, the three landscapes were called North of Nowhere, East of Nowhere, and South of Nowhere, and each painting was hung on the wall relative to the cardinal point on the compass. North of Nowhere was facing uptown, so on and so forth. The wall that would have hung a West of Nowhere was the opening into that room, and so it just felt right to sort of take that missing piece in the jigsaw and expand it all the way out west, and put the show in Los Angeles, and rather than make a West of Nowhere painting, make a different space, so that space in New York is a sort of an imagined space that you stand inside and look out into those different directions, and it sort of places you in the middle of that space with the columns and the sort of platform. But I thought, well, West of Nowhere, rather than it being a painting, would be the show, and there'd be a new space, a different location that would be West of Nowhere. Nowhere being that space that you stood in front of those New York landscapes. And then I inverted it all. I mean, as I say, I inverted the columns. They went from framing the view to obstructing the view. Mm-hmm. They went from being landscape to portrait, and the landscape itself went from dark to light. I didn't really make those decisions in the sort of arbitrary way that I'm saying now. It's just what happened. But what is sort of more conscious is I do kind of have these sort of thoughts about location and geography. I mean, you say that there's no location, and these are not specific in terms of time and space, and you're absolutely right about that. But I still like the idea of plotting the paintings in an imagined space relative to each other. I mean, I had a show in Amsterdam, and a month later in Hong Kong, of a group of work which got split into two shows, and one was called Mount Atom and the other one was called Point Datum, but they were all relative to each other, and they were kind of speaking to each other. So I mean, I kind of do that a little bit. It's sort of hopscotches and sort of leapfrogs about a bit. I mean, I had the previous show I had in LA, which is it was like 2015. That sort of was related to the first show I had at Pace Gallery in London in 2019. I mean, I had shows in between, but then also the show in New York this last year was related to one I had in New York in 2017. So they jump back and forth a bit. I have, as I say, I'm slow to absorb things and to think about things. So, what I'm thinking about now might not. I mean, I've got the ideas for the next paintings. They've been in my head now probably 3 or 4 years, and that's partly a result of not can't just suddenly pick up those paintings because of those ideas, because I had paintings that were 4 years old in my mind a year ago, and 2 years ago, and 3 years ago. So I haven't yet got there yet, and they will, and they're also not ready. There's a long gestation period. When they're ready to turn into something more concrete from an idea, and an idea is nothing. You can't grab it, you can't pick it up. They're not ready yet to be solidified, and maybe they won't be. But the ideas jump about, and they, ideas breed ideas.
These pieces in West of Nowhere, these columns, and again, this goes back to the old conversation about the viewer's share and whatever baggage I'm bringing when I'm viewing them. But when I look at these columns spaced the way they are in what can be interpreted as like an arid desert-like landscape, it registers in my mind as being really similar to the portions of our border wall with Mexico that have been built. And it brings up all sorts of questions about, if this was a wall. Obviously, it's not much of a wall because there's space on either side. Maybe this is what's left of what we tried to erect as a wall, but in centuries it's decayed and has been painted to reflect these brighter colors because we see the frivolity of that. I look at that and it feels eerily reminiscent. And, again, that's just, me and my baggage in terms of how my mind is programmed to interpret a series of columns in an arid landscape.
Yeah. I can't think like that when I'm making the paintings because they would become sort of illustrative of one thing, for example, that you described. That never occurred to me, your reading of it. But that's, again, because I just have to these would be things that I would worry about 20 years ago when I was at school. The reading of the paintings, what do they mean? But I don't worry about it now. There's that famous saying, I don't know if it's famous, but it's beloved by a lot of painters. Barnett Newman saying, art criticism is to artists what ornithology is to birds. I can't get too into the ropes on what it is on my birdness, if you know what I mean. It's but after the fact, so it's I do think about them after the fact, and and I do draw some connections and think, oh, okay, I was doing that. But no, the thing is, when I had the idea of doing this, it did occur to me for a brief few minutes that this was the stupidest thing in the world to be spending the next year of my life painting. But honestly, if you have that thought, if you hold on to that thought, you'll never get anything done. And sometimes, the stupidest ideas are the best. Also from the same documentary where Barnett Newman said that this is a great documentary, Painter's Painting.
Yeah.
De Kooning said that painters have the dumbest ideas, and he didn't say that as an insult. He mentioned Monet painting haystacks.
Right.
It is the dumbest thing in the world, and it is and that's why I kind of dread at the dinner table, at a party being asked, what do I do? Because of they are this, for the last year I just spent a year painting columns. That's about as stupid as it gets. But not to do it is also no less stupid.
Well, how do you maintain the courage to follow what in your mind might be a stupid idea? That's where the genius often lies, is in committing to something that's open-ended and not intuitive, because I think or at least I want to see something I've never seen before, right? How do you have the courage to have something that is new and might seem counterintuitive and know I'm going to spend a year committed to this? Does it come from a place of self-confidence, or does it just come from a place of, knowing it's a process and, I can trust my process?
Yeah, I don't know that it would be courage. They say, there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. So, people don't, it's also experience. I've had the experience of seeing where the more interesting things come from. And I don't think the more interesting things come from a knowable place. I think that when you try to make a statement, I think it really negates and gets in the way. And that's why I think that painting is something that is old age proof. Because that the longer you've been doing it, the more you sort of, art school is really important. It's important in so many ways, but it doesn't. The lessons that you learn after art school, you spend 2 or 3 years or however many years at art school learning to sort of button it up and do it a certain way. Then you spend the rest of your life undoing it all, and and learning that it doesn't matter. I mean, one of the things actually is that one of the peculiar things about Der Tilliers was that you got to experience some really famous, well-known artists as teachers. But because it didn't follow the sort of German school of kind of master and apprentice, sort of Jedi master and apprentice, there wasn't the sort of hero worship that was going on, and so you were able to go from sort of hero worshipping to very, very quickly dropping all that, and you realize that everyone's bringing in their own baggage, and no one really knows anyway. And so the idea that so if you if you say, oh, I'm going to spend a year of my life making these paintings, and gosh, that's really an odd thing to be doing, and it's perhaps a bit of a stupid thing. Well, I've yet to see anyone have a better idea. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what they're doing. I'm no braver than anyone else. I mean, have you spent the last year feeling confident that you were doing the right thing? And you're just,
I don't know. Really don't know if anyone can say that. So you were talking about where ideas come from. Let me ask you about the ferryman, which is in your recent past. That image, where does that come from?
Well, that's a slightly unusual one for me in that it does come from somewhere outside of my paintings. It comes from the album cover of The Yellow Submarine. So actually describing it, I'm not sure if what came first, the chicken or the egg here, but I was thinking about death, as we all do, and I was imagining the figure of death, and it in Western culture usually looks a certain way. So the sort of famous example is the Seventh Seal, or someone in a black cape and usually a scythe or something like that. But then I was thinking about, and again, I'm not sure the order of how these things sort of came into my mind, but there's a sort of genre of movie where sort of a fantastical movie where the lead character goes on an adventure, a trip, usually kind of psychedelic in a way, and they come back from it and they realize, or the audience realizes, that everything that they've seen was all contained in their own world beforehand. The sort of famous example of that is Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy comes back to Kansas, and the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and they're the farmhands, the witch is the horrible old lady, and so on and so forth. The sort of carpet, the sort of is the Oz, and then in what's the other movie? So Labyrinth. That's another one where she goes on her mad adventure, and it's all in her bedroom. It's the same premise with Time Bandits as well. You realize everything that the child has experienced in there, it was all contained in the bedroom. So I was thinking that, then maybe death would be the same sort of thing. Maybe if, for starters, just point out, I'm not religious and I don't believe in the afterlife, but I was just sort of playing with the idea that the idea of death would be something peculiar and particular to us individually, something that allowed us to individually be prepared to take their hand as they take us over the river. And so for me, when I was a small child, before my memory sort of kicked in on a day-to-day basis, there was we had maybe half a dozen movies that I'd seen so many times, and one of them was The Yellow Submarine, and I think it just tripped my mind as a small kid. And so I thought, so I was looking at the album cover of the Ferryman of the Yellow Submarine, and I thought, well, I can cut this up. Not literally, I didn't deface the actual album cover, but I printed it out. So I just cut it all up into pieces and just reformed it and into my Ferryman, and so that's my figure of death, purely artistically terms. And then and so and I thought that and the idea expanded, and I wanted to make a show of it, and I wanted to go on a sort of a journey, and I made these tondos, which these round paintings, and I sort of organized them in my mind in groups where they would sort of I'd have very large. I had three sets of two. I had two large ones, two medium ones, two small ones, and I floated them in the space, the two each pair back to back, and the idea, and it worked out. But the idea was that when you're on the side with the big paintings, looking sort of down the length of the room, there'd be a kind of a forced perspective of it sort of pushing off into the distance, because when you see two shapes, when you see two identical shapes, your brain reads them as being the same. Now, the fact that they're literally get smaller and smaller, you perceive that in an optical way. And then when you're on the other side of that experience, at the nearer the smaller paintings, and you would look back the other way, being physically closer to the smaller painting and the big one in the distance, they compress space. They kind of appear to be the same size. So I just wanted to create a space that sort of threw the Ferryman paintings in the far room into the long distance, and then when you got to that room and then turned back around, you would be confronted with the opposite experience of a compressed space, which would then sort of throw you off to the side room where you had the landscape. Figured that I had this kind of experience leading towards the Ferryman. I should probably have somewhere of terra firma, which could have been the starting point. It could also be the end point. I mean, maybe that's the bit after the ferry. Maybe that's the other side of the river. It's ambiguous which side of the river it's on. But I just thought that there was these three moments that I wanted to turn into a show. And I had the walls built to accommodate the idea. So, for example, the room that housed the round paintings, I wanted to pinch the opening into that room really tight, so that there was no way that you could get that vista of seeing all of them together until you walked into the space and walked around it.
Right.
So that your first view was only that large painting, and it hid everything else. You'd have to walk in and then go around. So the whole show was, a lot of painters tend to make their paintings and then they have a show, and there'll be walls for a dozen paintings, and they'll have 20 paintings, and then they'll figure it out, they'll jazz it on the day, and that's how most sort of painters work. I mean, I do it very much the other way around. I start, my blank canvas is the space, and that's what I'm working from, and I seem to be getting more and more into constructing an environment, which is slightly unfortunate because of these shows. They have a run and then they close, and then that's it. But the last show had, there was a book made for it, so we made the book in such a way that it kind of mirrored the experience as best we could.
So those round paintings in the Ferryman show, are those double-sided? I didn't have a chance to see the show in person.
They're double-sided. So you'd had six paintings, two groups of three. So you'd have two large paintings, two medium, two small. And the front image was sort of a dark and pale pink arrangement. And on the reverse was another painting the same size that was a yellow painting. So they were two paintings faced back to back, and yes. And then when I was designing the space, and I built a physical model. Actually, some of the guys at the gallery built it for me, a little model. I said, "Can you build it to the scale of Lego, so my kids can play with it afterwards?" And I started to look at it, and I realized I accidentally or subconsciously thought I'd been making myself a Roman house or temple, because of there was the atrium that led into the cloister where it was so obvious to me anyway when I saw it that the room with the round paintings was the cloister. And then there was a room in these Roman houses where a shrine room where they put their shrines. For me, that was the ferryman room, and then they have a internal garden called a hortus, I think, and to me that was the room to the side with the landscape. So I think I'd inadvertently, consciously or not, been making a Roman house for the show, The Ferryman. But the thing is, you have these ideas, as stupid as they are, and they certainly do sound stupid when one says it. But I'm a painter. I don't say it. I paint it, and once it's painted, it's not stupid. Painting haystacks at different times of the day is only stupid when you have to say it at a dinner table. They're not stupid paintings.
So tell me about the smaller pieces in the current show, because they seem to borrow some of that symmetry that we see in The Ferryman. I think some people have kind of referred to him as Rorschach blots, but I think they're incredibly compelling. What's going on with those pieces?
So they were born from the tree paintings I'd made. I made 3 or 4 large tree paintings, and they take forever to make those paintings. And I'd usually make one, take a whole year to paint it, just one painting. Then I need a year to recover and for my brain to forget how much hard work it was, and then I think, and then I had the great idea of doing it again. And then I realized, oh my God, just set myself up for so much more work. So it's been a while since I've made those, but I'd made these smaller paintings in the sort of Rorschach way you described. And I'd made 2 of these paintings and never finished them. They were small little paintings, very small. And I was going to show them in my London show, my first show with Pace, and it didn't feel right. And then every show I've had since, no, not every show I've had since, but there's been a few shows since where I've thought, well, maybe this is the moment, but it's never felt right. I think I might have been holding back because I think I subconsciously felt that these 2 little paintings deserved more than just to be 2 little paintings. And then this show in LA, it felt right. I've never had a show before where I've showed just 2 visual ideas together, but I really wanted to do that, just to pair 2 ideas together, just to see that relationship. But the little paintings that I'd made, they were too small for the gallery. I think I'd have had to have painted, a dozen of them, and I think that would have been too much. It didn't rhythmically right, so I put those 2 aside, and I made. God, how many did I make for the show? I think I made 6. Made 6 slightly bigger paintings that felt like they were right for the space. Yeah, and I think I'd like to. I'm not ready to give up on it. I think there's more there. Maybe there's a large painting that is that has that mirror track thing to it. I think I'm just slightly scared of the amount of work involved in it.
Right. They're beautiful. Scale does something in terms of enveloping us, and I understand the benefits of having an enormous painting, but these smaller paintings are not any less significant because they're amazing. I'm sorry about the labor-intensive part because, I certainly want to see more of those.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I mean, I would like nothing more than just to spend a year making a painting. That isn't going to feed and clothe my children.
Right. Right. So the show was up now through October 21st. And folks are going to be in LA. It's at the Pace Gallery, 1201 South La Brea. Well, I really appreciate you providing insight on your process and your work. It's beautiful work, and I certainly encourage people to definitely go check it out.
Yeah, thanks very much.
That's
That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.